Summer week.
So we're talking sun, sea, and your time starts now.
Who will shine?
Wowza.
And who will hit the panic button?
I think we need to work faster.
I think there's some absolute smashes there.
I'm really impressed.
The Great British Sewing Bee continues tomorrow at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
The Tigers enjoyed their dinner.
This is BBC One in the East. Now the BBC News with Clive Myrie and Janine Machin at 10 o'clock.
Tonight at 10, a verdict is about to be given in the trial of a former police officer accused of the killing of George Floyd. His death last year after pleading for his life, saying he couldn't breathe under the weight of Derek Chauvin kneeling on his neck, sparked protests right around the world. This is the scene live inside the courthouse in Minneapolis, where the jury is about to render its decision. We'll bring you the verdict as soon as it happens and analyse what this could mean for race relations in America, also tonight. Chelsea fans voiced their anger over the side joining the new European Super League, but tonight the club announces a rethink. And others, including Manchester City, are expected to follow.
Then if you lift the wire.
And detectives say a bomb left near a policewoman's car in Northern Ireland was designed to kill the officer and her young daughter.
Here in the East, are returning travellers from COVID-hit countries causing the recent rise in Luton's infection rates? And how artificial intelligence and a simple sponge on a string are saving lives from cancer.
Good evening. A verdict is expected in the next few minutes in the trial of a white police officer accused of the murder of George Floyd. The verdict on Derek Chauvin, who's 45, must be unanimous at the end of a trial that's lasted 3 weeks in Minneapolis that has shone a light on police tactics and racism in America. Mr. Floyd died after being handcuffed and restrained on the floor by a number of officers, but it was Mr. Chauvin who knelt on Mr. Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes and repeatedly said, "I can't breathe." Bystanders videoed what happened on their mobile phones, and much of the testimony concerned the footage. The prosecution claimed it was the direct pressure on Mr. Floyd's neck of Derek Chauvin's knee that led to his death, while the defense argued other factors, including illegal drugs found in Mr. Floyd's body, were more instrumental in his death. Well, let's go live now to Lebo Duseko, who's outside the courthouse in Minneapolis. Lebo.
Clive, there's a high level of anxiety and tension here as people are just waiting for that verdict. Of course, the shop behind me is where this story began. You can hear people chanting George Floyd's name. It was outside that shop that Derek Chauvin pinned George Floyd beneath his knee as he begged for his life. We've heard prayers from local community members as they hope for a guilty verdict.
It was a death that shook the world, ripping open America's unhealed wounds on racism and police brutality. But much of the evidence of this crime was not gathered by police. Instead, it was the local community who documented it, filming, begging, and remonstrating with officers as Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9.5 minutes. Among them, the teenager without whom there may never have been a trial. It was the video filmed on her mobile phone that was seen around the world. A minor at the time, her face was not shown in court.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. It's the nights I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more.
When their efforts to intervene failed, several members of this community reported what they'd seen.
At some point, did you make a 911 call?
That is correct. Did call the police on the police.
And why did you do that?
Because I believe I witnessed a murder.
Derek Chauvin's job was to police and protect this community. But so damning was the bystander footage, along with the police body camera video, that his fellow officers turned against him.
To continue to apply that level of force to a person proned out, handcuffed behind their back, that in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy. It's not part of our training, and it is certainly not part of our ethics or our values.
Okay, we're going to take you straight to the courthouse now in Minneapolis, where the verdict is about to be announced. Let's listen in.
Children.
And the judge there, who has been dealing with this trial, hearing evidence from both sides for at least 3 weeks. Highly emotive case.
I understand you have a verdict.
And here we go.
Envelope? Yeah, open the envelope with me.
Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota, County of Hennepin, District Court, 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota Plaintiff versus Derek Michael Chauvin, Defendant. Verdict, Count 1. Court File Number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, Juror Foreperson, Juror Number 19. Same caption, verdict Count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by Jury Foreperson, Juror Number 19. Same caption, verdict Count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury Foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror Number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts, so say you one, so say you all?
Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy-duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will...
Judge Peter Cahill there in the courthouse in Minneapolis, hearing those verdicts. Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder, guilty. Count 2, third-degree murder, guilty. And count 3, second-degree manslaughter, also guilty. Guilty of all the charges. Let's go to our North America correspondent Nick Bryant, who's also in Minneapolis for us tonight. Nick, this is what the family, this is what the prosecution, and indeed it seems the President of the United States wanted.
Clive, you've taken the words out of my mouth.
Guilty, guilty, guilty. Exactly what the Floyd family wanted. Exactly what the protesters wanted. And it seems exactly what the President of the United States, Joe Biden, wanted as well. He made this extraordinary intervention early on while the jury was considering its verdict, while they were sequestered in a hotel. He said he'd spoken to the Floyd family and that he'd prayed for justice, and that on the evidence that he's seen, he was hoping for a guilty verdict. And that is what has happened. Guilty of second-degree murder. That's unintentional murder. Guilty of third-degree murder. Guilty of the manslaughter charge as well. And the worst charge in that carries a maximum sentence of 40 years. And actually, prosecutors have indicated they might actually try and get additional years added on to that sentence. And the question, Clive, is, as you know, how will this verdict be received around the country? For a lot of African Americans, there will be a sense that justice has been done in this case, but obviously they're looking for justice across the board in so many other areas of their life. So this has been such a moment of racial reckoning, but the question remains whether this will be a moment of racial reconciliation. As you and I both know, this country is so bitterly divided along its angriest fault line of race, but at least this verdict may calm the mood. So many cities are doing what Minneapolis have done today, which is to board up in anticipation of furious protests. Well, there won't be fury on the streets tonight, but there may be protests on the streets tonight, and that always carries the potential of trouble. But as you say, this is the verdict that the protesters in this trial and the family of George Floyd so dearly wanted.
Nick, thank you for that. Nick Bryant there in Minneapolis. We're going to go back to the city now and talk to Lebo Diseko, our correspondent, who's actually standing outside the store where George Floyd died almost exactly a year ago. Lebo, lots of security on the streets. The authorities worried about protests and crowds. What's the situation now?
Well, Clive, as each of those verdicts was given, people here cheered. People were watching, and I heard people clapping, cheering as each of the guilty counts was read. I was speaking to people before the verdict came in, and they were saying to me that the only verdict they would accept as justice was guilty on all counts, and that would be the beginning of not even a healing. Somebody described it to me as a chance to reset when you take into account all of the racism, the legacy of white supremacy in this country. That is how it was described to me, and somebody compared it to placing your leg in a cast after a break. It doesn't put things right, but it's the beginnings of a start of healing.
Lebo, thank you for that. Lebo Diseko live in Minneapolis there. Let's get some wider perspective now from our North America editor, John Sopel, who is in Washington. John, the death of George Floyd, it sparked riots across America, it sparked protests around the world, and the president, we know, has intervened today. How would you sum up the state of relations, race relations in America following this verdict now?
Well, I'm sure some people, Clive, will think, well, the state of Minnesota has taken the case against Derek Chauvin, case closed, verdict delivered. I think it is anything but that. I think the tension in this country has been palpable. Joe Biden, just down the road from here, has been huddled around the TV set along with his key aides. I'm sure he's going to come out and have words to say very shortly. The National Guard in Washington has been mobilized for fear of trouble. It is the same across the country. States of emergency have been declared because of what might have unfolded and what might still unfold. Because this isn't about just Mr. Chauvin. This is about justice in America and the sense that if you are black, you're more likely to be arrested, more likely to be charged. In the case of George Floyd, die at the hands of the police. So there is two questions that I think come out of this. One is criminal justice. Can criminal justice be properly delivered to the African American population in this country, to minorities who feel that the odds are stacked against them? And the second question is about who polices the police. Is there going to be police reform at the end of this that will somehow change the equation and make black people feel in this country that they are treated evenly and that justice, to use the old hackneyed phrase, is blind, or in this particular case, colourblind? The whole idea of the US Constitution, it's in the preamble, is to create a more perfect union. In other words, to keep the country together as one. Maybe at the end of this, a small step has been taken forward, but I think...
Still no place for Tammy Abraham in the squad.
Campaigners would argue that even after this, there is still a very long way to go.
Okay, John, thank you for that. John Sopel there, live in Washington, and we'll get more from the United States and in the wake of that verdict at the end of the programme. Now, plans for a controversial European Football Super League are unravelling tonight as Manchester City say they're withdrawing from the contest and Chelsea are preparing to do the same. The formation of the league involving English, Spanish and Italian clubs has drawn widespread condemnation from the sports world and European governing bodies, as well as millions of fans here. Here, Boris Johnson pledged he'd take whatever action is necessary to stop England's richest clubs joining the breakaway tournament, and the Premier League was considering options to kick out the English clubs involved. But with some of the original European sides now considering participation, this European Super League looks in jeopardy. Our sports editor Dan Rowan has the latest.
The backlash had been building, and as fans protested outside Stamford Bridge tonight against Chelsea's part in the breakaway that's plunged football into chaos, it began to unravel. Word reaching the crowd that their club had been the first to pull out.
I heard sort of down there, someone was going around sort of shouting, oh, you know, we're out.
Well, mixed reactions really, because I don't think we should have been in the first place. So we've already showed that we've sold out, and now we've reversed because of protests.
Just minutes later, it emerged Manchester City had also had a change of heart. No wonder, perhaps, after their own manager had slammed the plot to create a ring-fenced European elite earlier in the day.
It's not a sport when the relation between the effort and the success, the effort and reward don't exist. So it's not a sport. So it's not a sport of the success is already guaranteed. It's not a sport and it doesn't matter if you lose.
2 days ago, these clubs, including English football's so-called Big Six, stunned the game by signing up to the Super League. But with two of them withdrawing and others set to follow, the pace of its demise has been just as dramatic. Tonight, Manchester United Supremo Ed Woodward, a pivotal figure in the launch of the Super League, resigned, the breakaway seemingly on the brink of collapse.
I'm extremely pleased that this thing is breaking down, as all the country seems to be. I've never seen the country so unified on an issue as this, but I've got to say that I am flabbergasted by the whole process. I think it's a disgrace that experienced people have behaved in such an amateurish, embarrassing way. There should be many more resignations.
Tonight, the Premier League continued, having faced the biggest threat in its history, just hours after the 14 clubs not involved in the plot had met to discuss the crisis amid calls to expel the rebels.
You're seeing the power of the fans. You're seeing what. Don't forget, football players are fans. They've grown up being fans of football themselves, so they know what it feels like to be a fan. And they understand the connection between the players, the fans, the club.
Tonight, the Prime Minister, who earlier had threatened to block the breakaway with legislation, said he commended Chelsea and Manchester City for their decision and hoped the other clubs involved would do the same. It now feels like when, not if, they follow the Premier League leaders and also pull out of a divisive scheme that managed to unite the game in condemnation. And with the Super League's plans in tatters, many will now be celebrating. And so it appears the so-called European Super League isn't quite so super after all, following a seismic but ultimately shambolic bid to get this breakaway off the ground, one that threatened the entire footballing pyramid. The Super League already lacked French and German clubs. Now it's lost the dominant force in the English game in the form of Manchester City. For now, the American-owned clubs like Manchester United here, who are always the driving force really behind this bid, appear to be clinging on, but surely behind the scenes they are now also preparing to withdraw. And it will be fascinating to see how long it takes for the damage, for the bad blood that this episode has created to be forgotten. It won't be easy because the owners for now are staying put. Owners who badly misjudged the mood among their own supporters. Perhaps that wouldn't have been the case if they attended matches at their clubs more frequently. A number of forces were at play here. The threat over players playing for their national teams, clubs being expelled from their leagues, but ultimately perhaps what proved decisive for once was fan power.
Dan, thank you for that. Dan Rowan there, live at Old Trafford. Let's take a look at today's government figures on coronavirus now, which show there were 2,524 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means that, on average, the number of new cases reported per day in the last week is 2,476. The latest daily figure for the number of people across the UK in hospital with coronavirus is just under 2,000. 33 deaths were reported of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. On average, in the past week, 26 deaths were announced every day, taking the total to 127,307. 99,672 people have had their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, taking the overall number of people who've had their first jab to just over 33 million. And the number who've had their second dose in the latest 24-hour period is just under 274,000, taking the overall number of people who've had both jabs to a little under 10.5 million. Let's take a look at some of the day's other top stories now. And the Defence Minister, Johnny Mercer, has resigned over the government's treatment of troops who've served in Northern Ireland. He says he's been frustrated that British soldiers who served during the Troubles are to be excluded from legislation designed to protect them from unwarranted prosecutions. The government has ended its plan to hold daily Downing Street news conferences hosted by the Prime Minister's press secretary. Instead, Allegra Stratton, a former journalist, will become his spokeswoman for the COP26 climate conference being hosted in the UK in November. The trial has begun of 3 men charged with perverting the course of justice in the aftermath of the Hillsborough disaster in 1989. A former police solicitor, Peter Metcalfe, and the former South Yorkshire police officers Donald Denton and Alan Foster are on the right here, are accused of altering police statements following the tragedy in which 96 Liverpool fans died. They deny all the charges. And Greater Manchester Police is investigating the rape of a woman by a gang of men in Wythenshawe. Detectives have described the attack as random and sickening. They were called to the scene in the early hours of this morning. No arrests have so far been made. Detectives say a bomb left near a police officer's car outside her home in Northern Ireland was an attempt to murder her and her young daughter. The explosive was attached to a container of flammable liquid in County Londonderry yesterday. Officers believe the dissident Republican group, the New IRA, was responsible. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy has more details.
The explosives were designed to cause a fireball, say police, which would have engulfed the officer's car and anyone in it. The officer herself found the device at home.
What is really distressing here is the terrorists placed the bomb at the rear of the car directly at the point where the victim's 3-year-old daughter sits. This demonstrates the complete and utter disregard for the life of a mother and her toddler. This simply beggars belief.
Police think the group known as the New IRA were behind this attempt to kill a police officer, believed to be the first in over a year by the dissident group, who opposed Northern Ireland being governed as part of the UK. Although a number of the suspected leaders of the New IRA were arrested last year in an operation by police and MI5, it's known the group remains a threat, continues to be prepared to plan and carry out attacks mainly against police. In 2019, a bomb found in Derry's Craigan estate and a device under a car in Belfast were both said to have been attempts to murder officers. Today, Northern Ireland's First and Deputy First Ministers spoke personally to the officer who was targeted.
In speaking to her, that it's still a fair degree of shock. It's only sinking in. The magnitude of what could have happened to both herself and her young family. And that is totally unacceptable, and we have to call it out.
It's believed lockdown may have helped curtail dissident Republican activity over the past year, but this is a reminder of the danger that remains. Emma Vardy, BBC News.
The unemployment rate fell slightly to 4.9% between December and February, but overall there were 813,000 fewer workers on payrolls than in March last year, with the under-35s accounting for 80% of the losses. The Office for National Statistics says the figures show the jobs market remains subdued, with 5 million people still on furlough, as our economics editor Faisal Islam explains.
As lockdown is slowly lifted, these young people seeking jobs are retraining with the numeracy, communications and teamwork skills they need to get them. But it's been a tough year.
A lot of our young people who would traditionally be going, from school or doing their A-levels and things like that, going into kind of open position jobs like in supermarkets and retail, obviously because of lockdown and closures, they're not always available, but also because a lot of people who are being made redundant because of the pandemic with more experience and qualifications are going into those positions.
The main rate of unemployment has basically been unchanged during the second lockdown. Employers have been able to navigate this year better than a year ago. The extension of the furlough scheme has prevented a further predicted increase in official joblessness. Last year, when the pandemic hit, unemployment was expected to go to 8, 9 or even 10%. Right now, it's not even 5%, and some are daring to hope that the peak will be around 6%, even when the furlough scheme is closed down. But that includes a significant hit to livelihoods, overwhelmingly of younger people. Over half the 813,000 jobs lost over the past year have been lost by the under-25s. 4/5 have been lost by under-35s. Back at the Street League programme, Stephen and Nathaniel say it's been tough.
Very difficult. I've been handing out my CV a lot to a lot of different places. No responses.
I found it quite hard to find something I could go straight into where I didn't want to go into uni. And the only option that was coming up was something like this, like a course, like a program where you can gain a qualification whilst learning on the job.
Immediately there are more jobs available as hospitality reopens. Some reason for optimism before government support is phased out from the summer. That will be the true moment of reckoning. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
We're going to get more on the guilty verdicts in the George Floyd murder trial in Minneapolis in a few minutes, but here the Equalities Minister has strongly defended a controversial report on race in the UK commissioned in the wake of Mr Floyd's death. In the Commons today, Kemi Badenoch described attempts to discredit the findings as bad faith. The report concluded that the UK no longer had a system rigged against minorities. Labour says the government should reject the findings and believes the report doesn't reflect racial injustices. Here's our Community Affairs correspondent, Adina Campbell.
George Floyd's death shocked communities and countries all over the world, causing a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, which sparked national conversations about racial inequality and racism in the UK.
Black Lives Matter!
It led to the government commissioning an independent review about race. But 3 weeks on since it was published, the backlash continues, with mounting pressure on the government to reject the findings. Today, ministers responded, showing unwavering confidence in the reports.
It is of course to be expected that members will disagree about how to address racial inequality and the kinds of policies the government should enact. However, it is wrong to accuse those who argue for a different approach as being racism deniers or race traitors. It is even more irresponsible, dangerously so, to call ethnic minority people racial slurs like Uncle Toms, coconuts, house slaves or house Negroes for daring to think differently.
But Labour were quick to disagree.
They have published a shoddy, point-scoring polemic which ignores evidence and does not represent the country that I know and love. It is reprehensible, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I hope the Minister will reject it today so that we can get on with the task of tackling institutional and structural racism, which is the lived experience of many.
The report seems to have done the complete opposite of what was intended, to rebuild trust and recognise the very real barriers facing ethnic minorities in the UK. Instead, we're seeing even bigger divisions and deeper feelings of resentment.
The government will provide its response to the report by the end of the summer, but campaigners fear it risks undoing the work of the Black Lives Matter movement and attempts to level the playing field for people from ethnic minorities.
Adina, that report, as I say, was commissioned in the wake of Mr. Floyd's death, sparking a debate around the world, and including the UK, obviously, on race.
George Floyd's death has had a profound impact on the conversation about race in the UK. It led to more than 200 Black Lives Matter protests last summer in towns and cities up and down the country, involving tens of thousands of people. And the reason why they mattered is because it felt like a seismic moment about race relations here in the UK. It caused people, communities, organisations and businesses to take a long, hard, honest look about how they deal with racial injustice and racial inequality in our society. And that's the reason why the independent commission was commissioned in the first place. Given what's happening in the States at the moment with the verdict, this is all likely to intensify already emotional feelings about a very, very sensitive issue.
Okay, Adina, thank you for that. Adina Campbell there. So to recap, Derek Chauvin has been found guilty on all 3 counts of murder, including involving George Floyd. Our North America correspondent Nick Bryant looks back now at the crime that had repercussions around the world and the trial that has now delivered unanimous verdicts.
History turns on these kind of moments. And in the trial of Derek Chauvin, it wasn't just America yearning to know the outcome, but also the wider world. On the second day of its deliberations, the jury delivered its verdict.
Verdict, count 1. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. Verdict, count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. Verdict, count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty.
The most emotive evidence presented during the trial was the video of George Floyd's killing. Pictures that showed the brutality of the white police officer. The sound that revealed how George Floyd uttered the words, "I can't breathe," almost 30 times. Shocking video that in the midst of a global pandemic went viral. Police brutality, a disease America has never cured. Even as the jury was considering its verdict, protesters congregated outside the court. Not since the trial of O.J. Simpson has a verdict been the focus of such concentration and concern. And it even brought about an extraordinary presidential intervention. Joe Biden describing how he telephoned the Floyd family last night.
They're a good family, and they're called for peace, tranquility, no matter what that verdict is. I'm praying the verdict is the right verdict, which is, I think it's overwhelming in my view.
Minneapolis looks like a garrison town. The boots of 3,000 members of the National Guard are on the streets. Cities across America are boarding up in the knowledge this verdict will reverberate throughout the land. The spot where George Floyd was killed felt early on this morning like the eye of a brewing storm. For activists, this whole area has become a landmark of inequality, a haunting reminder of America's racial breach. Will this guilty verdict calm the angry mood? Will it bring a sense of justice? Nick Bryant, BBC News, Minneapolis.
Let's go back now to Lebo di Secco, at the place where George Floyd died that has now become known as George Floyd Square. Lebo, just sum up the mood there. The authorities were braced for trouble. Does the suggestion and the fact that the verdicts were all guilty mean that perhaps the idea of trouble is perhaps receding a little?
Yeah, I mean, there was certainly a sense of celebration, relief, really, even from people here when they read the guilty verdicts. I think that really the core of this case has been the value of black life in America. That is what people have been saying to me over and over again, and whether they can trust that police will be held accountable for taking it. This was about George Floyd, yes. It was also about all the other cases of black men and women who have died in encounters with police. And it's just a week or so ago since a young black man was shot dead after being stopped at a traffic stop on the other side of Minneapolis. So yes, people are pleased with the verdict that was given today, but they also say there's a whole system that needs to be reformed and much more work that needs to be done before they can trust that they will be treated equally under the law and that their country values them equally.
And Lebo, is there any suggestion that we might see the kind of reforms of the police force in Minneapolis that many protesters have been calling for?
Well, there had been talk of that. There was a vote here a while ago to defund the police. Then that was backtracked. I think there is a feeling here, certainly from the community members, that there needs to be more that they'd like to see done. They have a set of demands that they say that they're not seeing progress on quickly enough. I think the authorities would say that they are trying to make reforms. They are listening. They are trying to be open and work with the community members, but I think there's going to be a lot of work on both sides before people feel heard and feel valued again.
Okay, Lebo, many thanks for that. Lebo Diseka there, live in Minneapolis. Much more, of course, on this developing story on the BBC News channel and over on Newsnight on BBC Two. But from us, that's it. Now on BBC One, time for the news where you are. Have a very good night.